When I turned 65, I set a table for 8 people I loved more than anything in this world. By the end of the night, not a single chair had been touched. I'm Margaret Collins, and for most of my life, I believed family was something you could count on. Not because life was easy, but because family was supposed to be the place you returned to when everything else failed. My 65th birthday fell on a warm Saturday in early June. The kind of day that made the neighborhood feel alive. Children rode bicycles down the sidewalk. Lawnmowers hummed in the distance. The maple tree in my front yard swayed gently in the breeze. I woke up before sunrise, too excited to sleep. It had been years since I'd hosted a proper family gathering. Ever since my husband Robert passed away 4 years earlier, celebrations felt smaller. Quieter. But this year was different. My son Ethan had promised he would come. My daughter-in-law Vanessa said she was bringing her famous pecan pie. My granddaughter Olivia had texted me 3 separate times that week asking if I would save her a corner piece of birthday cake. Those little messages stayed with me. They made me feel needed. Included. Loved. By 10 that morning, my kitchen smelled like roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and fresh dinner rolls. I spent hours preparing everything exactly the way my family liked it. The good china came out of the cabinet. The crystal glasses were polished until they sparkled. I even unfolded the embroidered tablecloth Robert and I had bought during our 25th wedding anniversary trip to Vermont. It had only been used for special occasions. This felt special. At least, I thought it did. Around noon, Ethan texted me, "Can't wait to see you tonight, Mom." I smiled when I read it. Vanessa sent a thumbs-up emoji an hour later. Olivia sent a picture of herself wearing a birthday hat she planned to wear at dinner. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. At 5:30, I changed into a navy blue dress. It was simple but elegant. The kind of dress that made me feel confident without trying too hard. I brushed my silver hair, applied a little lipstick, and stood in front of the mirror. For a moment. Robert used to tell me birthdays were not about getting older. They were about seeing how much love you had gathered along the way. That memory gave me strength before I stepped into the main room. I lit the candles for good measure. 6 o'clock arrived. No one came. I told myself traffic was probably bad. 6:15. Still nothing. My phone sat silent on the table. 6:30. The food was getting cold. 7 o'clock. I called Ethan. Straight to voicemail. I called Vanessa. No answer. I sent a text asking if everything was okay. Nothing. By 7:30, the refrigerator hummed alone in the quiet kitchen. The dining room that had looked warm and inviting an hour earlier now felt too large. Too empty. 8 chairs surrounded the table. 8 untouched place settings. 8 reminders that I was sitting there alone. The candles had burned low. Smoke curled upward from the wicks. I stood and walked slowly into the kitchen. The birthday cake sat untouched on the counter. White frosting. Blue flowers. 65 written across the top in silver icing. I stared at it for a long moment. Then my phone vibrated. My heart jumped. Finally. I grabbed it immediately. But it wasn't a text. It wasn't a phone call. It was a notification from Facebook. Vanessa had posted new photos. At first, I smiled. Maybe they were on their way and sharing pictures from earlier in the day. Then I opened the album. My smile disappeared. There was Ethan. There was Vanessa. There was Olivia. There were my sister and her husband. There were cousins, nephews, and family friends. Every single person I had expected at my birthday dinner. All of them stood together on the deck of a luxury cruise ship beneath a bright Caribbean sunset. Champagne glasses raised. Arms around each other. Smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Making unforgettable family memories together." I stared at the screen. My hands suddenly felt cold. My heartbeat slowed into something heavy and hollow. Because one thing became painfully clear in that moment. They hadn't forgotten my birthday. They hadn't gotten delayed. They hadn't missed dinner by accident. They had all gone somewhere together. And they had made sure I was the only one left behind. I sat alone in the dining room until darkness fell. The glow from the chandelier reflected off the untouched crystal glasses, making them sparkle as if the evening had gone exactly as planned. But nothing about that night felt right anymore. My phone remained in my hand. I kept staring at those photographs. Ethan smiling beside Vanessa. Olivia laughing with her cousins. My sister Linda raising a glass. Every face carried the same expression. Happiness. Not one person looked uncomfortable. Not one person looked like they had just missed an important family celebration. I enlarged the photos one by one. Looking for something. An explanation. A clue. A sign that perhaps I had misunderstood. Instead, I found details that made the ache in my chest grow heavier. The blue thread on Vanessa's matching shirt caught my eye. All of them wore coordinated outfits. This was not a last-minute trip. This was something everyone had planned except for me. Then I noticed how their shadows aligned against the railing. They had arrived together. Stood together. Taken the photo together. No gap for someone who should have been there. Around 9 o'clock, I finally stood and began clearing the table. One plate at a time. One glass at a time. The silence felt louder than any argument ever could. The roasted chicken went into storage containers. The mashed potatoes into the refrigerator. The dinner rolls into plastic bags. I wrapped the birthday cake carefully and placed it on the bottom shelf. Halfway through cleaning, my mind drifted back. 2 years earlier. Olivia's middle school choir concert. I had arrived 15 minutes before it started, only to discover everyone else had attended a special family dinner afterward. No one had mentioned it to me. Vanessa had apologized and said there must have been a misunderstanding. At the time, I believed her. A year after that. Christmas Eve. I had spent all afternoon preparing gifts for my daughter's children. The carol singers performed. The presents were exchanged. Then, an hour before dinner, Vanessa called with news that Ethan was tired and wanted a quiet evening at home. No mention of anyone coming over. No mention of family gatherings. But the next morning, photographs appeared online showing a large gathering at their house. Friends. Neighbors. Relatives. Everyone except me. Again, there had been an explanation. Again, I had accepted it. Standing alone in my kitchen that night, those memories began connecting themselves. Like puzzle pieces finally finding their proper places. For years, I had convinced myself that each incident was isolated. Bad timing. Miscommunication. Simple oversight. But what if it was not? What if there had been a pattern all along? Halfway through wiping the last counter, my hand paused against the cool tile. I carried the last stack of dishes to the cabinet and paused when I noticed an old framed photograph sitting on the shelf. Robert and me standing beside a lake during a summer vacation years ago. His arm around my shoulder. Both of us smiling at the camera. I picked up the frame and sat down at the kitchen table. Robert had always noticed what I missed. He understood people. He used to tell me that kindness was important, but that kindness should never require blindness. Back then I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I wondered if he had seen something I missed. Near midnight, my phone finally lit up. My heart jumped before I could stop it. It was a message from Ethan. Only 6 words. Sorry, Mom. We will talk later. No explanation. No apology beyond those few words. No mention of my birthday. No mention of the cruise. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I placed the phone face down on the table. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Most houses had already gone dark. I looked around my empty kitchen and realized something uncomfortable. The cruise itself was not what hurt the most. It was the realization that everyone had known. Everyone had participated. And somehow, I was the only person who never saw it coming. The next morning, I would begin looking for answers. But before I found those answers, someone else was about to reveal a secret that would change everything. The next morning, I woke up after only a few hours of sleep. The house felt unusually still. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window and settled across the hardwood floor, but it did little to warm the heaviness that lingered inside me. I poured my first coffee of the day and sat at the table where we'd shared thousands of conversations over the years. My phone rested beside the mug. Silent. No birthday wishes. No explanations. No apologies. Just silence. Around 9 o'clock, I began gathering the decorations from the dining room. Streamers. Balloons. Paper napkins printed with silver stars. The evidence of a celebration that never happened. While clearing decorations, I studied the family photographs displayed throughout the house. Ethan at 10 years old holding a baseball trophy. Olivia as a toddler sitting on Robert's lap. Christmas mornings. Graduation ceremonies. Summer vacations. Looking at those photographs, I realized something unsettling. The happiest memories in those frames all seemed to come from years ago. Before Vanessa became the center of every family decision. Before Ethan started looking at his phone more than he looked at the people sitting across from him. Before invitations became vague and conversations became rushed. My thoughts were interrupted by a text message. For a brief moment, I thought it might be Ethan finally reaching out. Instead, it was Olivia. The message was short. "Grandma, are you home?" I immediately replied that I was. A few minutes passed. Then another message appeared. "Can I call you?" My stomach tightened. Olivia rarely asked permission to call. Usually she simply called. Something about the question felt different. "Of course," I wrote back. The phone rang less than 30 seconds later. Her voice sounded nervous. Much quieter than usual. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart." For a moment neither of us spoke. I could hear distant sounds in the background. The hum of air conditioning. A television somewhere nearby. Traffic outside. Then she finally said something that made my heart sink. "I am really sorry about yesterday." I closed my eyes. "Thank you, Olivia." Another pause followed. "Grandma, I wanted to tell you something before, but Mom said I was not supposed to." My grip tightened around the phone. "Tell me what?" Her voice dropped even lower. "The cruise was planned months ago." I felt my chest tighten. "Months ago?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Everybody knew." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were surprising anymore, but because hearing them spoken aloud made them real. "Did your father know?" I asked gently. "Yes." My eyes drifted toward the family photographs on the wall. "And your Aunt Linda?" "Everybody knew." Olivia sounded miserable. "Grandma, I thought you knew too." "Mom said you were busy and did not want to come." I stared out the kitchen window. The maple tree swayed softly in the morning breeze. "I was never invited, sweetheart." Silence filled the line. Then I heard her take a shaky breath. "I knew something was wrong when Grandpa's sister asked where you were." Mom got mad and changed the subject. I said nothing. Olivia continued. "Later, I heard Mom talking to Dad. She said it was easier this way." Easier. The word echoed through my mind. Easier for whom? Certainly not for the woman who spent an entire day cooking for people who had no intention of showing up. "Grandma?" Olivia asked softly. "Yes?" "I do not think this was an accident." I looked down at the untouched birthday cake still sitting in my refrigerator through the glass door. For years, I had explained away every slight, every exclusion, every awkward family gathering. But now the pieces were beginning to fit together. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough to reveal a shape I could no longer ignore. Neither do I admitted quietly. Olivia remained silent for a moment. Then she said something that would stay with me long after the call ended. "Grandma, there is something else you should know. I heard Mom talking about you a few weeks ago." And what she said did not sound like someone talking about family. When the call ended, I sat motionless at the kitchen table. Because for the first time, I realized that the cruise was never the real story. It was only the first crack in something much larger hidden beneath the surface for years. With a notebook on my lap, I sat in the living room that afternoon. Thinking. Remembering. Replaying years of conversations that once seemed harmless. The more I reflected, the harder it became to ignore what had been hiding in plain sight. Vanessa had never been openly rude to me. That was what made everything so confusing. In public, she was always polite. She remembered birthdays. She smiled in photographs. She called me Margaret instead of Mom, but I had convinced myself that was simply personal preference. Looking back, I began to realize she rarely needed to say anything cruel. She operated through omissions. Through exclusions. Through carefully arranged circumstances that always left me standing just outside the circle. I remembered a family barbecue 3 summers earlier. Ethan had promised to stop by my house first so we could drive together. An hour before he arrived, Vanessa called and explained there had been a change of plans. They would meet me there instead. When I reached the park, everyone was already eating. The plastic chairs arranged like spokes around a circular table. The only available chair sat alone at the far end. Vanessa had smiled and said, "Oh goodness, we thought you might prefer a quieter spot." At the time, I laughed and sat down. Now the memory felt different. Then there was Olivia's dance recital. Vanessa had assured me she would save me a seat. When I arrived, every reserved seat had been filled. I spent the performance standing near the back wall. Afterward, Vanessa apologized and blamed a misunderstanding with the theater staff. Another misunderstanding. Another coincidence. Another explanation I accepted without question. By evening, my notebook contained a list of memories stretching across several pages. Individually, none of them seemed dramatic. Together, they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Every road somehow led back to Vanessa. Every exclusion. Every forgotten invitation. Every last-minute change. I found myself wondering how Ethan could not see it. Then again, perhaps he had seen it and simply chosen the easier path. Even as a child, he avoided arguments whenever possible. It was one of the things Robert used to worry about. "Ethan has a good heart," he once told me, "but sometimes good hearts mistake peace for honesty." That evening, I opened my laptop and began scrolling through old family photographs online. At first, I was searching for reassurance. Proof that I was imagining things. Instead, I noticed something strange. Over the past 5 years, I appeared less and less often. Family vacations. Holiday dinners. Birthday parties. School events. My absence repeated itself again and again. Sometimes I had not been invited. Other times I had attended briefly before schedules suddenly changed. The family moved forward together, and I drifted further toward the edge until my name barely appeared in their memories. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang unexpectedly. The caller identification displayed a name I had not seen in months. My sister Linda. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. Eventually, I answered. Her voice sounded hesitant. Almost guilty. "Margaret, I have been trying to figure out what to say all day." I remained silent. Linda took a deep breath. "There is something about that cruise you need to know." My stomach tightened immediately. What is it? Another pause followed. Then she said words that sent a chill through me. Vanessa did not just leave you out. She made sure nobody told you about it. I closed my eyes. The room suddenly felt very still. Because deep down, I had already started suspecting that possibility. Hearing someone else confirm it made the truth impossible to deny. And what Linda revealed next would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my place in the family. We stayed on the phone for nearly an hour that evening. For most of the conversation, I listened. The more she spoke, the quieter I became. I should have told you sooner, she said more than once. There was genuine regret in her voice, and for the first time in days, I believed someone in the family felt as troubled by all of this as I did. According to Linda, the cruise had been discussed for months. Group messages had been exchanged. Reservations had been made. Plans had changed several times before everything was finalized. My name had never appeared on any of those discussions. Not once. I assumed Ethan had talked to you separately, Linda admitted. Then a few weeks before the trip, I asked Vanessa if you were excited about it. She told me you had declined because you wanted a quiet birthday at home. I closed my eyes. And you believed her? Linda hesitated. At first. That answer hurt more than I expected. Not because she had trusted Vanessa, but because the explanation sounded so unlike me. Everyone who knew me understood how much family meant to me. They knew I would never willingly choose solitude over time with my children and grandchildren. Yet somehow Vanessa's version of events had been accepted. There is more, Linda said carefully. I could hear papers rustling in the background. A few days before the cruise, I called Ethan to ask if you were feeling better. Feeling better? I asked. Vanessa told people you had been overwhelmed lately and wanted space from family gatherings. I stared across the room at Robert's photograph resting on the bookshelf. A strange calm settled over me. Not peace. Not relief. Something colder. She told people I wanted distance from my own family? Yes. Linda sounded ashamed. Margaret, I am sorry. Looking back, none of it makes sense. After the call ended, I sat alone in the dark living room. The lamp beside my chair cast a small circle of light across the carpet. Everything outside that circle disappeared into shadow. It felt symbolic somehow. For years, I had only seen the illuminated pieces. The smiles. The polite conversations. The carefully maintained appearances. Now the darker spaces between those moments were becoming visible. Vanessa had not simply excluded me. She had been rewriting the story. Quietly. Methodically. She had been creating explanations before anyone asked questions. That realization stayed with me through the night. The following morning, I found myself opening old emails and messages. Not searching for proof exactly. Searching for understanding. The further back I looked, the more examples I found. Invitations arriving after events were already planned. Schedule changes that always seemed to disadvantage me. Family updates delivered secondhand instead of directly. Individually, each incident appeared insignificant. Together, they painted a different picture. Around noon, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I was not expecting visitors. When I opened the door, I found Thomas Whitaker standing there. Robert's longtime attorney. He had handled our estate planning years earlier and occasionally checked in after Robert passed away. He offered a warm smile. Margaret, I was in the neighborhood and thought I would stop by. We settled into the kitchen with coffee. For a moment we just sat together. The weather outside the window. The quiet of the house. Retirement. Then Thomas glanced toward a framed photograph of Robert and his expression softened. Your husband was one of the most thoughtful men I ever knew. I smiled sadly. Yes. He was. Thomas nodded. There is something I have been meaning to discuss with you for some time. My attention sharpened immediately. He set his coffee cup down carefully before continuing. Several years before Robert passed away, he made certain updates to his estate documents. At the time, he told me they were precautionary measures. Nothing more. A faint uneasiness settled in my stomach. What kind of precautionary measures? Thomas studied me for a moment. The kind a man puts in place when he worries that the people he loves may not always be treated fairly. Those words lingered in the air between us. Suddenly, every memory from the past week seemed to converge into a single moment. Because whatever Robert had anticipated years ago, I had a feeling it was about to become very important. He opened his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. The paper looked old, slightly worn at the corners, as if it had been waiting patiently for years. He placed it on the kitchen table between us. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I stared at my name written across the front in Robert's handwriting. My throat tightened instantly. I had not felt his handwriting on any paper in years. Thomas folded his hands calmly. Robert instructed me to keep this sealed unless certain concerns ever arose. I looked up at him. Concerns? He nodded. He worried that after he was gone, some people might not value you the way they should. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically somewhere down the street. Inside, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Carefully, I opened the envelope. The first page was a letter. Robert's letter. His words felt so alive that for a moment it was as though he had just set his coffee cup down beside the envelope. He wrote about our life together. About our first apartment. About raising Ethan. About the years we spent building a family and a home. Then the tone changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. Robert explained that several years before his death, he had begun observing changes within the family dynamic. Nothing severe. Nothing obvious. Small things. Conversations. Attitudes. Decisions that seemed to place convenience above loyalty. He never named anyone directly, but I knew exactly what he was describing. If you are reading this, one paragraph said, it means circumstances may have unfolded in ways I hoped they never would. I trust your judgment. More importantly, I trust your strength. Tears filled my eyes, but I did not cry. Instead, I kept reading. Attached to the letter was documentation related to our estate plan. Thomas quietly explained each section. Several provisions had been added years ago. Most were straightforward. Others surprised me. Robert had established a trust designed specifically to protect certain family assets. The structure prevented those assets from being transferred, sold, or controlled by anyone attempting to isolate or manipulate another family member. The language was precise. Careful. Thorough. Robert had thought about every possibility. He was very detailed, Thomas said with a faint smile. That does not surprise me, I replied. What surprised me was something else. Near the end of the documents was a provision I had completely forgotten. If evidence ever emerged that a beneficiary had intentionally interfered with family relationships for personal advantage, their future access to portions of the trust could be restricted. Not automatically. But it would trigger a formal review. I sat back slowly. Suddenly, many recent events took on a different significance. The exclusions. The misinformation. The stories Vanessa had been telling other relatives. None of it seemed harmless anymore. Thomas studied my expression. Margaret, I am not suggesting anyone has violated anything. I am simply telling you what Robert put in place. I nodded. I understand. But the truth was that I understood more than he realized. For the first time since my birthday, I felt something other than sadness. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. Robert had seen warning signs long before I did. He had not reacted with fear. He had prepared. Thoughtfully. Quietly. Just as he approached everything else in life. Before leaving, Thomas handed me copies of the relevant documents. Keep these somewhere safe, he said. At the front door, he paused. One more thing. What is it? He smiled gently. Robert always believed that truth reveals itself eventually. The only question was how long it would take. After he left, I carried the documents into my study and locked them inside a drawer. Then I sat at my desk and stared out the window. Across the street, children were riding bicycles beneath the afternoon sun. Life continued as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed. Because for the first time, I realized I was no longer trying to understand what had happened. I was beginning to understand why. And before the week was over, someone would unknowingly give me the final piece of the puzzle. The cruise ended 3 days ago. I learned it through social media. Photographs of luggage, airports, cheerful captions about returning home. I watched none of it with the same hurt I had felt earlier in the week. Something had shifted inside me. The sadness was still there, but it no longer controlled the room. Understanding had begun taking its place. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I simply looked at it. Then I answered. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded cautious. Careful. Like someone approaching a frozen lake without knowing how thick the ice might be. Hello, Ethan. A brief silence followed. I wanted to call sooner. I know. Another pause. About the cruise. He stopped speaking. I waited. Eventually he continued. Things got complicated. I almost smiled. Complicated. It was remarkable how often complicated appeared whenever simple honesty was missing. Did they? I asked quietly. Ethan sighed. Mom, I know you are upset. That is not entirely accurate. My calm seemed to surprise him. I could hear it in his silence. He had expected anger. Perhaps tears. Perhaps accusations. Instead, I sounded exactly like myself. Vanessa thought you wanted some space, he finally said. There it was. The explanation. The same explanation that had apparently been distributed throughout the family. Interesting, I replied. Because I never told anyone that. Silence returned. Longer this time. Mom. Ethan began. Then stopped. For the first time, uncertainty entered his voice. I realized something important in that moment. He did not know how much I knew. He did not know about Olivia's phone call. He did not know about Linda's confession. He certainly did not know about Thomas or Robert's documents. Ethan was operating with incomplete information. And for once, I did not rush to fill the gaps for him. We should get together, he said eventually. Maybe dinner next week. That sounds nice. Again, he seemed surprised by my response. Before ending the call, he added something else. Vanessa feels terrible. The statement lingered between us. I thought about all the effort Vanessa had invested over the years. The stories. The exclusions. The carefully managed perceptions. None of it sounded like the behavior of someone overwhelmed by guilt. I am sure she does, I answered. After we hung up, I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the afternoon sky. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Not because the situation had improved. Because I had stopped fighting reality. Later that evening, another message arrived. This one from Vanessa herself. It was longer than Ethan's. Polite. Carefully written. She apologized for the misunderstanding. Explained that communication had become confused during the planning process. Claimed nobody intended to hurt my feelings. Reading it, I noticed something curious. The message contained many explanations but very little accountability. It sounded polished. Rehearsed. Like a statement crafted to close a conversation rather than begin an honest one. I set the phone down without replying. About an hour later, Olivia sent me a message. Only one sentence. Mom is nervous. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then I looked across the room toward the drawer containing Robert's documents. For years, Vanessa had appeared confident. Comfortable. Certain that her version of events would never be questioned. Now something was changing. Small cracks were beginning to appear. Not because I had confronted anyone. Not because I had demanded answers. Simply because the truth was starting to move on its own. And the following Sunday, when the family gathered for what they believed would be another ordinary Sunday dinner, those cracks would become impossible for everyone to ignore. Sunday arrived. I prepared the house. The dining table was set with fresh flowers I had selected myself earlier in the day. The good dishes were arranged neatly. Everyone else would arrive later. This time, I already knew they were coming. Around 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Ethan and Vanessa arrived first. Olivia followed close behind them. A few minutes later, Linda and her husband walked in carrying a dessert. They exchanged greetings. Coats were hung. Drinks were offered. Small talk filled the rooms. If a stranger had walked through the front door, they would have seen a perfectly normal family dinner. But beneath the surface, something felt different. Vanessa seemed especially cheerful. Too cheerful. She complimented the flowers immediately. Asked about my garden. Commented on how wonderful the house looked. Every smile I saw felt carefully placed. Every word she said seemed selected in advance. I noticed that she watched me frequently. Not openly. Just enough to gauge my mood. To measure whether I was angry. Hurt. Defensive. I offered her the same calm smile I had given everyone else. Nothing more. During dinner, conversation drifted from travel stories to summer plans. Ethan described an excursion from the cruise. Linda listened quietly. Olivia barely touched her food. Vanessa filled silences whenever they appeared. The longer the evening continued, the more uncomfortable she seemed to become. Eventually she set down her fork and looked directly at me. Margaret, I really am sorry about what happened. The table grew quiet. Ethan shifted in his chair. Olivia stared at her plate. Vanessa continued speaking. The trip became complicated to organize and somehow communication fell apart. There was that word again. Complicated. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. Communication did not fall apart. Vanessa blinked. I am sorry. My voice remained calm. Communication did not fail. People made choices. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything said before. Vanessa forced a small laugh. I think there were misunderstandings on all sides. Linda looked down immediately. Ethan stared at the table. No one rushed to support Vanessa. No one repeated her explanation. I realized they were all waiting. Waiting to see what would happen next. Waiting to see how much I knew. I reached beside my chair and picked up a folder. The same folder Thomas had given me days earlier. Vanessa's smile faded slightly. Ethan frowned. Mom, he asked. I opened the folder and removed several sheets of paper. This week has given me time to reflect, I said. I spent years believing certain situations were accidents. Scheduling conflicts. Honest mistakes. But I learned something important recently. No one spoke. Patterns matter. Vanessa's expression became still. Completely still. I looked around the table. I spoke with Olivia. I spoke with Linda. I learned that many people were told I did not want to attend family events. That I preferred distance. That I requested space. Ethan slowly turned toward his wife. Vanessa immediately looked back at him. I never said that. But the denial arrived too quickly. Too automatically. Linda finally lifted her eyes. Actually, you did. The room went silent. Vanessa stared at her in disbelief. Linda swallowed hard and continued. You told me Margaret wanted to be left alone. You said she was overwhelmed and did not want invitations. Ethan's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. The kind of change that happens when a person suddenly sees two versions of the same story standing side by side. For years, Vanessa had controlled the narrative. Now other voices were entering the conversation. And for the first time, she no longer seemed certain she could explain everything away. I closed the folder gently. I did not need to show anyone the documents. The truth was already beginning to speak for itself. And judging by the look on Ethan's face, the conversation that followed dinner would change far more than anyone at that table expected. The dinner was quiet after everyone finished. The plates remained on the table. Coffee sat untouched in several cups. The conversation that followed was quieter than anything I had imagined. There were no dramatic outbursts. No shouting. No scenes worthy of a movie. Just the uncomfortable sound of people confronting facts they could no longer ignore. Ethan sat across from me with both hands folded together. For most of the evening, he had listened. Really listened. Perhaps for the first time in years. Vanessa continued offering explanations. Miscommunications. Assumptions. Confusion. Yet each explanation seemed weaker than the one before it. Not because anyone was attacking her. Because too many people now remembered the same events differently. Linda remembered conversations. Olivia remembered comments she had overheard. Even Ethan began recalling situations that suddenly looked very different through a new lens. At one point, he looked directly at me. Mom, why did you never tell me any of this? The question surprised me. I thought about it carefully before answering. Because I kept believing the next explanation. Silence followed. And because I trusted my family. Ethan lowered his eyes. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Eventually, Vanessa stood and quietly excused herself to the patio. The room felt lighter after she left, though that realization brought me no satisfaction. Only sadness settled in my chest. I never wanted my family divided. I only wanted honesty. Later that evening, after everyone else had gone home, Olivia stayed behind for a few minutes. She hugged me tightly before leaving. I am glad you know the truth now, Grandma, she whispered. I kissed the top of her head and smiled. So am I. When the house finally became quiet again, I carried my coffee onto the back porch. The night air felt cool against my skin. Crickets chirped in the distance. The same porch where Robert and I had spent countless evenings talking about life now belonged entirely to memory. Yet for the first time in a long while, those memories brought comfort instead of loneliness. Over the next few weeks, several things changed. Ethan began calling more often. Not out of guilt. Out of effort. There is a difference. He visited without being prompted. He asked questions. Sometimes difficult ones. Sometimes painful ones. But he asked them anyway. Linda and I grew closer as well. We started having lunch together every other Thursday. The years had given us both regrets, but they had also given us perspective. As for Vanessa, she became noticeably quieter around family gatherings. Not humiliated. Not punished. Simply unable to control every conversation the way she once had. People had begun comparing stories. Asking questions. Paying attention. The illusion had lost its power. One afternoon about a month later, I opened the refrigerator and noticed something sitting on the bottom shelf. The birthday cake. The same cake I had saved after that empty evening. I laughed softly to myself. Then I carried it outside and threw it away. Not because I was angry. Because I no longer needed it. That cake belonged to a version of me that spent too much time waiting for other people to choose her. The woman standing in my kitchen now stood differently. She understood something different. Respect cannot be demanded. But neither should it be surrendered. A few days after that, I visited Robert's grave. I brought fresh flowers and sat beside the headstone for nearly an hour. The roses still in his name nodded gently in the breeze. I told him everything. The cruise. The lies. Olivia. Thomas. The letter. All of it. By the time I finished, I felt lighter than I had in years. Before leaving, I placed my hand against the cool stone and smiled. You were right, I said quietly. The truth found its way out. Then I stood and walked back toward my car. Not as a victim. Not as someone seeking revenge. Simply as a woman who had finally stopped questioning her own worth. My 65th birthday was not the day my family abandoned me. It was the day I finally saw my family clearly. And once I did, I discovered something far more valuable than an apology. I discovered peace.